Hey everybody, today I wanted to cover my Foundry VTT setup and the things that I do sort of as a computer person to set up that machine appropriately so that I can host Foundry VTT pretty much 24/7 to the public internet. All right, let's go through it. So today I'm going to cover the software setup of the server on which I run Foundry VTT. Let's get into it. So first, the server setup. It's a physical machine attached to my home network, and I make sure that number one, that physical machine and all the networking equipment between my ISP and it that I'm responsible for is on a home UPC. So that's an uninterruptible power supply. So that's one of those battery backup systems. They're not too expensive, but I do recommend if you're going to run something that's effectively a server, run it on this. Because while, if you have a brownout or you're playing the game during a storm, or even just, people are logging in and fixing their character sheet or something, it's really nice if you just know that power problems at your house aren't going to cause something to reboot all the time, which can cause problems for servers in the long run. Mostly time and effort problems for you rather than something getting corrupted. But it is nice to know that the thing is pretty much good to go and always going to stay up and not get interrupted in the middle of something. I'm running on Ubuntu Linux because of, it's going to have some nice, easy to use features for me, somebody that isn't sort of maintaining it as my job. But knowing that I get good patch cycles and whatnot, just picking a flavor of Linux is something that you're likely going to want to do, and Ubuntu or CentOS or something like that. There's a whole bunch of them, but pick something that you find that the documentation or the videos for are really well written. Through Ubuntu Linux, there's a bunch of different options for this, but I configured nightly backups. All of the kind of database of Foundry when you're running locally is on a little local file system. So as long as you're taking snapshots of that file system, you should be able to restore to a previous day if, say, you messed up, or even if you wanted to roll back and upgrade or something and you just wanted to say, oh, forget it, I'm sick of this, I just want to reverse time and kind of do like a time snapshot and rewind time and restore a previous day state of your thing. Having this happen automatically late at night or something, super easy in Linux. There's a bunch of UIs for it and it just generally works. Another thing that I don't see in a lot of the tutorials is that you're going to want to turn on your Ubuntu firewall if you are hosting to the public internet. So you should probably have this on even if you've got UPnP networking on your router, even if you're doing anything where you're going to leave it up long term. This is always a good idea. So that UFW command you see in the screenshot here, that's the command for the Ubuntu firewall. And here I'm listing its status, but there's some pretty easy tutorials for opening up ports on it. You want to be as restrictive as possible and only open up ports for the things you're going to know you're going to use. And here you can see my setup where I have for IPv4, so that's like normal IP addresses, and IPv6, those bigger, longer ones. Connections are allowed from outside the machine, really from anywhere, on port 80 and port 443. That's HTTP and HTTPS. But I also have port 22 open, but only from inside my home network. I don't allow that from the public internet, from coming from outside my home network. That way I can remote log into this box using SSH from any laptop, any device I've got in the house. Maybe if I just need to reboot something or start something or tweak something, but I don't have to, I'm not able to do that from outside my home. I have no reason to. I only mess with this thing when I'm at home anyways. So once you've got this set up, you know that box there's not really any other way to get onto it from a network that's not through one of these two things. It's hosting a web server is a standard thing. So you don't want to leave it wide open. You want to have multi-layered sort of controls as to who can get onto it. The next thing you have to figure out is port forwarding. So my internet service provider gives me an IP address. It's not particularly static, so I might have to mess with this if something changes. But I have an IP address for my house, effectively, and that is what the ISP is responsible for getting people to my front door, to my cable modem router that my ISP gave me. That cable modem router is sort of not optional for me. I can't swap it out. It's machine address is what the ISP is expecting me to have. So it is assigned basically a subdomain of .1 anything from 1 to 255. Those are the IPs that it's able to hand out as my local network. For reasons I don't really want to get into, just I prefer to have a different router for my house when I'm doing Wi-Fi. I have a second subnet underneath that one. I've got my own kind of higher powered router that's got access points and stuff. I just want something separate for my ISP in case I ever want to switch out my ISP. That's my .2, .1 through 255. That's where my Foundry server is going to be sitting, hanging off of that thing by an Ethernet cable. So it's got a IP address that's assigned by the second router. So when that incoming traffic comes in, it has to know that for web traffic to forward all of that stuff down, basically any traffic on port 80 or port 443, it needs to forward from the cable modem router to the second router, and from the second router into my little, this little Intel NUC is what it's called, little unit of computing, this little server that I've got here, just because I'm not a hardware person, so I want something really easy. So port forwarding is going to look something like this for you, where you go into the website that is your router. Probably in this case it was 192.168.2.1 is the router. Usually the routers take the .1, and it in the kind of web servers, in the settings for port forwarding in there, just look up the documentation for your router. It's just called port forwarding. I had to add these two lines, one for 80, and I say take any TCP on port 80 and forward it to this machine, that's my NUC, and then take 443 and do the same thing. And it'll say what's the name of the server. It doesn't matter. That service name doesn't matter. It's the port and protocol are all that really matter. You can call that anything you want. That's just for kind of human readability. So, all right. So next, after that, because I don't want my players having to remember my IP address, but for no extra cost, if you've got a domain name, usually you can add a subdomain and have that route differently. So maybe my domain name goes to WordPress or something, but my subdomain that I use for my Foundry server can get rerouted to my home. And then from there, the instructions are super easy on the Foundry website for doing the Let's Encrypt to make sure that I can receive incoming HTTP traffic that's encrypted, so HTTPS. HTTPS needs a certificate that understands that I own that website subdomain and that I'm able to do sort of a challenge response to set it up in the first place. And Let's Encrypt pretty much does all of that for you, all the certificate stuff. It's the first time I've used Let's Encrypt, it was so easy compared to how we had to use to do this. So I'm a big fan of this. Hopefully it's, a well-run certificate authority. Let's hope, because it's so easy. Lots of people are probably using this. So I use Route 53 as my DNS provider off of Amazon. This costs me a couple bucks a year. Actually probably costs me a couple bucks a month with all the different websites I've got. But I find it super easy to use. You put a change in here, it may not turn on right away. A change to the DNS system of the internet takes a little while to propagate. So when you figure it out and you've got a change in there, it might take a whole day for someone accessing this to get routed correctly. So you make a change, you might have to come back tomorrow to use your phone and plug in that subdomain domain name and have it show up. So you're definitely gonna have to do this with enough lead time to get it up and running. You can still run off of your normal IP address in the meantime, but you're gonna need to give this a couple of days to get it all set up right. But once you do it, you should just be able to set it and forget it, because these things are super simple. All right, next, let's talk about the setup of the actual software on the NUC. We talked about the firewall, but after that, you're gonna wanna set up a reverse proxy. The reason is Foundry isn't really meant to be connected to the public. There's nothing wrong with connecting it to the public internet, but every piece of software, eventually vulnerabilities come out, and you don't want to have to patch Foundry for something really esoteric and worry that someone's basically gonna break into your Foundry server. You want to have something a little bit more security oriented with a little bit more configuration options in front of it. And typically what you're going to do there, and the instructions for this are pretty good on the Foundry website, you're going to set up what's called a reverse proxy. So information is going to come in to the machine, which is running the Ubuntu software, It's going to have that Ubuntu firewall to say only this amount of traffic is going to be, opened up from the outside world. And then the first thing it's going to hit on those two ports that are open, 80 and 443, are this reverse proxy server. And you can use Apache, you can use Nginx. There's a couple other ones in there listed. These are the ones I'm familiar with and I use at work. But you're going to use these to listen on port 80 and redirect users to 443. And there's instructions on how to do a redirect from 80 to 443. This is basically when you go to this on HTTP, it's going to kick a message back to the user said, no. Talk to me encrypted. I only want to talk encrypted. That's the only thing it's going to do. And then the proxy listens on 443 and it establishes the certificate. So it says, okay, this is my certificate. Are you cool talking to me? And since my certificate's signed by Let's Encrypt, which is a reputable certificate authority, it's going to allow that the browser is going to say, yeah, this is padlock. This looks reasonably safe. I'm having a private conversation with this server, and it probably is who it says it is. Encrypts the traffic so that now all passwords that are passed over this are encrypted and can't get sniffed, easily at least. So then it's going to, from there on out, I like adding an extra password just to the web server so that anybody who doesn't know the password for my, not even the Foundry password, but anybody who doesn't know the web password for my Apache and Nginx can't get any farther than that. They're not even communicating with Foundry if Foundry's got a misconfiguration or something, or is too open, or something is later discovered about Foundry that you don't want to connect to the internet. There's nothing I know of now that I don't like, but if something's discovered later, at least they had to get through Apache first with both encryption and an authentication password using something like basic digest authentication on this HTTP reverse proxy. So that, if you have an authentication and you have encryption, those two things are required to make something more secure. Just one or just the other isn't enough. The other nice part about this is I can configure Apache and Nginx to write out all the web logs about who's hitting my website and who's getting turned away at the front door because they don't know the password. And sometimes that data is really interesting. Logs tell you a lot about what's going on. These proxies are listening on port 80 and port 443, and only one piece of software can listen on something at a time. So you're going to have a different port. I'm here using the default of 30,000 is what Foundry is listening on. And then everything it's getting is somebody that should be there because they got through the firewall and they got through encryption and password protection on the reverse proxy. So everybody's there should be one of your users because you're not posting this password out on the internet, are you? You're just kind of emailing it one-on-one to your players, presumably. All right. Next trick is I use Dropbox to sync all of my assets. I have a shared folder, or just basically a folder in my Dropbox account. And because it's Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is super easy to use, I'm just able to install Dropbox on the Ubuntu machine. And then I use what's called a symbolic link. Inside my Foundry data directory, here I'm listing inside the data directory. This is how you kind of list the contents of it. You can see I've got this one compendium folder and a Foundry folder for all the extra tutorials and Foundry stuff that I'm doing that's not related to my game. And these are two different folders inside my gaming area of my Dropbox. So I can be working on a laptop pretty much anywhere in the world and put something in my Dropbox, and that content is automatically live getting synced onto my server. There's no FTP server. There's no me having to hit a button. It's just all live syncing so that I can be out on a road trip. Not doing a lot of those these days, but I can be in a hotel somewhere, pulling down a battle map, doing something, adding it in there, and then just logging in, from the web to my Foundry server and changing stuff. Really easy. I got a big Dropbox account, so this is how I like to do it. So I've got plenty of space in there. So that being said, let's go through some of the prep that I did for my Foundry server to show you what I'm doing here and how I'm hosting it. So one, create a custom backdrop, make it pretty, make it something specific, but I put links in to my wiki for LegendKeeper and for my D&D Beyond campaign. I put some links in there just to make them easy to find. And then, from here on in, because they've already provided a password, I don't really have to have a password per user. There's not really a way for the user to reset it themselves, so there's not much of a point of it. So they just have to know the password for my main Apache. The GM's account, of course, is locked down, so people can't go and accidentally look at the GM's notes, right? Don't want them to do that. I've got my LegendKeeper set up. So LegendKeeper is here, and I've got that session log so people can look through the notes. And the sessions that haven't happened yet is where I plan my game, and I just mark them as hidden. Love LegendKeeper, working out really great for me. The next thing is I've got a loading screen. And right now, while my players are learning it, the default loading screen is set to an image that I use that kind of has a little quick guide that I made, a little image that shows them the different parts of the things and what they're supposed to click on and how they're supposed to control their tokens. They're coming over from Roll20, so they're pretty familiar with most of this stuff, but I just wanted to provide some quick stuff. And I leave the loading screen as player navigatable so that it always stays up in the navigation so they can switch to it anytime they want if they're looking for something. All right. So next I create the sort of the actual loading screen where their tokens are. And this is where we'll start the game when we're loading people in. And sort of, it's a pirate game. So I have them on their pirate boat where they can remind themselves who all the NPCs are and whatnot. People looking at some of my videos say, hey, look, you've got some organization for your scenes and your actors. Can you go through that? So let me show you what I do to organize that. So I break out my scenes into meta. That's where I put all the stuff that's really just for me as a GM, getting Foundry working and testing it and doing setup. World maps, and then the various chapters of the campaign that I'm running. Right now they're chapter 1, they're just starting, but maybe there's some later chapter. I'll probably have to rename it because we're doing kind of world building on the fly. But as I'm making maps for things that I think might come up in the future, I just throw them in a future chapter. And the players can only see the folders for which they have scenes that they're allowed to navigate to. So they might not even be able to see the scene tab at all. So there's no way I can have a spoiler leak out here. So that's good. So in the meta area, I've got my I've got a scene that's just set for telling you all to subscribe. I leave that up in case I'm, just not wanting to switch back to an image when I'm editing the thing back together. I've got the loading screen with the instructions, and I've got my isometric token sizer, which I'm going to get into right here for a bit. So the isometric token sizer is a scene that I have set up that has a tile that I grabbed off the internet that has appropriately sized how big I want all the various races of D&D to be as they're, I'm making the token. So I might make the token, I might grab it from somewhere. They all aren't necessarily coming in the correct size, but I can tweak the size on them by lining them up on this lineup. This almost looks like a police lineup. I can put the tokens on here so that I can adjust them all so that relative to each other, players get a sense of the space because I'm using the space the same way every time. I've got a world map, and I leave this up as navigatable. Right now, this is a placeholder for my game. I haven't really drawn the world map yet. Until they go to their second town, I don't think it's really necessary for them to even have a world map to get a general scale of the map that we'll be playing on. But I was just messing around with some stuff. It's an underwater game, so I wanted to have multiple layers. I don't know. I might ditch that idea and just do all top down. But I was messing with this, and so I put up a world map just to get them the idea that they might come from a town that's actually under the ocean. They don't have to come from a surface town. But I leave that in the world maps area, and I make sure that these are all navigatable by the users and explored, and so that they can discover them as they explore them. So this is something, and Counter Library just dropped a really great video about this simple fog of war that works really well with hex crawls. So this is the very first thing that the players are going to see when we start the campaign soon. I'm time delaying this video, so by the time you watch this, it'll already have happened. But the very first thing is they're on a boat and they're headed to port, and they got a mission to port. So I'm going to move this boat over to the town, and I'm going to reveal and show these are, light gray is the stuff you know about. The totally bright is what you've actually experienced yourself. And dark means you don't know what's there because the world is mostly unexplored. They were looking for a points of light exploration style of play. So that hex crawl that they really liked in Tomb of Annihilation, we're going to do again, except Foundry supports it really, really well. So I'm excited about that. So that's, I'm not going to do a video on this because Counter Library covered it so well. It did a really great video. He scripts his talk so he doesn't have as many ums and mistakes. So great video. I don't have the time to do that. Thanks for subscribing. This is the sort of regional map that they're going to get to, and they're going to explore the regional map hex by hex as a hex crawl. I'm not necessarily doing that for the world map. All right, getting into the actual actors, my actors tab, I've got it organized in a very specific way. I use VTTA, love that plugin, but one thing that makes it run a little bit faster, I don't know if they've fixed this or if I still have to do this, but I go and when it's time for me to import the player's spells, I do that way ahead of time just to get all the spell book over as items in Foundry. So I create, following again more tutorials from Encounter Library, I create a bunch of mega PCs that are 20th level and have the entire spell book for their class, and I import them very carefully over. It only imports the stuff that they have memorized, so for the wizards it takes me a good 20 minutes, but once I do it I never have to do it again because I've got all the wizard spells. And if somebody just joined as an artificer, so I'll probably have to do that for all the artificer spells. But I've got wizard and druid done, and that gives pretty good coverage over the spells that people are getting. I'll probably have to do it for cleric as well. So I've got a couple of PCs in here that have no purpose other than getting spells over. I have the player characters, and I have the batch folder permissions so that I can make everybody an observer on everything in the player character section really quickly. I've got player spell templates. So this is an old trick I had in Roll20, which since I'm playing in isometric, I don't use the measuring templates for spells. I use things that are more focused on, they're basically art that's an actor that has a perfect alignment set up for my grid system. I showed that in a previous video. If Grape Juice ever gets this working and working really well, I'll probably switch to a more native isometric plugin for Foundry, but right now I'm still running in my hex trick mode. So while that occurs, I've got player spell templates. The only thing that's different between a player spell template and my GM templates is that the player spell templates have vision, so that when the player is moving them, they don't go blind. So they all have a certain amount of vision. So this does allow the players to see around corners a little bit when they're casting a spell forward. I don't really worry about that. I kind of run with the assumption that it's like a tabletop game played with minis where clearly you have to use some in-game, out-of-game knowledge. But this allows players to drag down their own spells and have them land perfectly the way that I like them on the map. And I can have special art for all of their spells. So isometric NPCs are all of the NPCs they might run into in their tokens. D&D Beyond import is what VTTA brings over when I bring a monster over. I leave these as is. I leave them as sort of the stock way that D&D Beyond brings them over. And then I make a copy of them when I give them alternate art for my isometric game. So I import into here, and that basically creates a big library. I know it also stuffs them in a compendium, but I will then go and customize them, and when they're clean and ready to use in game, I got all the things set up, they're hostile or non-hostile, all those things you got to do when you're setting up a token the way you want it. Those are all in this green folder, isometric monsters. So if ever I'm doing a random encounter, it's going to come out of the isometric monsters area. And then I've got the GM templates, which have no vision applied, because when I'm dragging them around, I don't need the vision. I'm the GM, so you just put no vision. It's like moving a monster. So I have an entire copy of all the templates for me to use, but then players can't move them, can't delete them, can't see through them, importantly. All right, so macros. I'm going to make a video on this, but I got really specific about how I was prepping macros. So I've got a couple bars, and you move between your different bars using this arrow. I kind of want to find a module that just has them all opened up or all closed, because I don't like having to hit this a little up and down. I'm gonna have to figure out something to make that work better for me. I need a bigger macro bar effectively. But I've got all these effects that I can apply using token magic. I'm gonna do a video specifically on token magic. And I've got a no filter button and a little art that says no filter so that I know I can really quickly pull them out. And then I went and applied all the effects that I'm gonna use in the next couple of games, and I applied them to a same monster so that I can see what the difference is. So I got a fire effect and an ice effect, a weird warp effect with psychedelic colors. This is like a watery warp effect. This is shield, and this is mirror image. And so I've got all these ready to go, but I can quickly visually call them out, or I can even hit the keyboard button for them. And when I'm done and I want to get rid of them, I just select the token and hit the 1 key, and it removes the filter. When it's the player's turn, and they're casting spell effects and things, I've got also some quick shortcuts for the status effects that I want to apply for the spells I know that they use a lot. They're first level right now, so they don't have very many spells, but one of the cleric took Bless, so I went and grabbed a Bless token from somewhere, and I made a macro specifically for toggling Bless on and off. And I'm going to make a video about that macro and how to toggle macros really, the conditions really quickly, and maybe have some other effects happen. But I've got a button here for turn off the filters. I have a button for remove all conditions. I've got a button for flip horizontal that I grabbed from the community macros, but I wanted a little button so that when I move and animate a character, I can quickly kind of emote with it by having it turn left and right. And then I've got a button for showing the token artwork, big screen for the player, because sometimes there's a high resolution image in there on their portrait that I want to show when they're talking to the character. So I just click on their token, hit 4, and we're good to go. So I'll show more of this when I'm explaining a little bit on how to code macros, or at least how to take one from the net and take an example and apply it. But I give them all little, I organize them this way so that I'm good to go in the game. And when something comes up, I'm not, fumbling around trying to figure it out. Doing a lot of prep for the first game. We'll see how much of this continues on. All right. So then when I set up a macro and I finally have it working with pretty art and all that stuff, even if I got the macro from somewhere else, I save all the macros that I have working into a compendium of the macros, so that if ever I delete one by accident or drag it off and it goes away, I can always go grab it again when it's time for me to reorganize them. So I've got this, quick, all the macros that I've got, and this will build up over time so that all the things I have for Bless are there. I might, have item, macros or other things that I use to hook into these later. But for now, this is good to go. This is all I really need to do. All right, so that was a quick run through of my setup. Next time delayed, of course, so there's no spoilers for my players, we're going to do that big macros and advanced Foundries module. So we're going to go through macros, a little bit of coding them. We're going to go through combat utility belt, which is a great, real power feature here that I'm really excited about. It's automating a lot of the things that I used to have to do manually. Now I just won't even have to think about them. And then token magic for some of those really fancy special effects. And I won't be doing this out of like screenshots. We're going to do it in Foundry. So if you want to see that, subscribe. That'll be the next video that I do. I'm also thinking about making a video about exploration-oriented maps, how to create maps. I'm going to use Incarnate. I think that's working pretty well for me. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the tips and tricks I learned for working with Incarnate and to generate the maps, but then regenerate them really quickly when it's time for the players, in between games. I say, oh, this is the stuff you explored and this is what you discovered, for me to add that stuff to the map really quickly before I write up session notes for the game. So those will be the next 2 videos. Thanks for being around. If you enjoyed this stuff, I enjoy making it. So leave a note in the comments about what you like, what you don't like, videos you like to see. I'm really excited to be starting my very first game in Foundry soon. You're seeing this time delayed, but as I figure stuff out, I'm going to drop notes about the modules that I'm using and the tips and tricks that I learn getting Foundry to work the way that I want it to. I'm going to do probably fewer of those videos where I'm doing video reanimations. I didn't get very many comments on those, so I figure I'm probably not going to spend as much time doing those. But if you have suggestions or you just like kind of following along, hit me up on the Discord server for Foundry, or any of the isometric Discord servers I'm part of, or leave the comments. I love kind of getting people's thoughts on the stuff that I'm putting down here. All right, thanks everybody.